Hey Barnabas, hey Greg, how you guys doing? I got a fan going on in the background. Is my mic picking that up, or are we good? Versus me and some Civilization 5? What? I mean, Civ 5, great game. Great game. I feel like the Civilization franchise is going to get. There are other companies that are going to kind of overwhelm it, I think, and unless they actually do release like a Civilization 7 that is like actually in some ways like leaps and bounds ahead. I think that companies like Paradox or companies like who else is doing that kind of stuff? Anyway, there are other companies that I think are going to start making those games a little bit more solidly. Anyway, who are you playing as? Yeah, so the news is really still going on about Israel, which makes sense. Like it's Netanyahu actually went on a meet the press and basically just lied his face off the whole time. Like it was just like a huge propaganda campaign, and he didn't get any pushback whatsoever, right? They just like let him spew his lies, right? They didn't bring up like the Human Rights Watch report on Israel at all. They didn't push back at all on any of the shit that he was lying about, and so it's and so I think that's really kicking off a lot of people who are just like, how can we tolerate living in this society where this like open air prison in Gaza is going on, and the leader is just blatantly, overtly lying about it as if we're just supposed to go along with that. Yeah, the Civilization series has always kind of like it's world politics, like trade, stock market aspect, because it gets difficult, right? Like how do you even a company like Paradox, which is really, they get very intricate about how systems work. They're very touchy about getting into any politics or any kind of things. Like once you get into the democratic societies, it gets very difficult, because in like medieval societies or even nation-based societies, it's easy to see where the power structures lie. That like power lies with the state. Like if you've got a monarchy, power lies with the state. They have control. But in democracies, it's different. And so how do you actually gamify those sorts of systems? And I was talking to someone, was it Minsky? Was that it? Minsky? Maybe I should look that up. Minsky economic model theory. Is that right? Part of the issue, I think, that games like Civilization are starting to run up into is that they don't actually have a good understanding of economic models, right? That economics, so to take something like Civ 5, right? Like literally gold is a resource that you mine off the map, right? And then you spend those resources to like build a building or build a unit or something, right? So gold is like it's and what matters in Civilization games is productivity, right? Like your ability, your capacity to build stuff. And they don't actually have like decent understandings of how economic modeling or economic systems work. And you can see that in a lot of the Paradox games. Like their idea of like trade is very loosey-goosey, right? And hopefully there's a economist, I believe it's Minsky. Anyway, they're starting to gamify economic models, right? They're starting to make use computers and computing to create economic models that it's likely then other game companies will take and begin to use those models in their games. And then I think things will get really interesting. Then I think you're going to start to get some Civilization games that are just like, where really interesting and crazy and intricate little things will start to happen. Yeah, well, it's something to look forward to in the future for sure. So I've been saving this particular one because here's Joel Harden, who I listen to all the time in the House of Commons. This is the NDP when they are in the House, and then they never show up like this on the campaign. So let's give this a listen.
Because the violence that's erupted in the Holy Land, in Palestinian communities, in Israeli communities, is truly heartbreaking. Speaker, this is not a conflict. This is a massacre. This is a moment when people of conscience around the world have to stand up and do what I'm so proud our federal leader, Jagmeet Singh, has done. Jagmeet has called for an end to arms shipments to the state of Israel. Because in a Palestinian community last week, armed settlers and an army from the state of Israel walked in and started to throw 6 families out of their homes. And that kind of practice has been going on for decades, and too few voices in Canada have spoken up against it. Speaker, Canadians have a unique responsibility around colonialism. It is the history and present of this place, where we have maintained colonial practices with the Indigenous peoples of this land. We have an obligation, uncomfortable as it may be sometimes, to speak truth to our friends around the world and to ask them to end institutional racism and institutional colonialism. I want to say very clearly, I stand...
Stop the clock. Stop the clock. Minister for Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries, please come to order. Start the clock. Allow the member to complete his statement.
I stand in solidarity this morning with the people of Gaza who are being massacred before our eyes, and I call on the Premier of this province to join me.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that the NDP are standing up and are taking the right position on this one. Like, I mean, that's exactly right. Like, even the Liberals will talk a big game and like admit the colonial history of Canada in regards to the First Nations people. And like, once you accept the colonial history of Canada, like once you understand that we are colonizers and we came in and we took people's land, it's very easy to see what's happening in Israel. Like that same story is unfolding there. So I'm glad to see that the NDP are standing up and actually making statements like this. And hopefully the NDP that show up in the House are the ones that show up on the campaign trail. It rarely happens, though. They like to get really cutesy on the campaign trail. I can't figure out why they do that. At first I was coming from a mechanic sense. Alliances and trading ain't worth a damn in this game. Anyone can call anything. Does not change anything. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally a lot of these games are war games, right? Like, even the new ones like Civ 6, and a lot of, like, Paradox has, like, Crusader Kings 3, and, you know, they have all these systems and all these things and all these alliances that you can build and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately they're war games. That everything is about how do you get to war. Hey Ruth, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, like I think you're talking about the NDP, right? Like what? I don't understand the NDP. Like I don't understand why they make these big bold statements in the House. They make these big, large proclamations. That are great, that everybody can, like, well, not everybody, obviously, but, like, that rally a lot of force, and people share it, and it gets a lot of attention. And then they go on the campaign trail, and they, like, wheel out Raffi, and they make these cutesy little videos where they're like, vote for NDP, we're the third option, tee-hee, tickle me Elmo. And I'm like, dude, you guys need to start, like, you need to be ruthless. Like, these guys are like, your enemies are sociopaths. Like, your enemies are, like, ruthless sociopaths. We're not going to vote for you if you know, look like these cutesy, Care Bear, cuddly Raffi types. Like, we're not interested. We need people fighting. and we know the NDP can do it. We see them do it in the House. They just don't show up on the campaign trail, right? And in the case of someone like Tal Mulcair, they literally give the election away. So there does come a point where I start to wonder, like, how, like, is the NDP just been co-opted? Like, do they just... Well, and they've got to learn that, like, Canadians vote for people who seem powerful. Like, you take a look at somebody like Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson is, like, kind of a kook, frankly. Like, a lot of what he says is, like, not really rooted in anybody's, you know, historical reality or any of this kind of stuff. But because he's forceful, and because he feels like you think, you listen to him and it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, right? And that goes a long way, right? Canadians really do just gravitate towards someone who seems forceful in their convictions and who seems genuine about what they're saying. And I really do think, like, when the NDP come out and they start doing that kind of, like, hey, we're the NDP, aren't we kicky, cutesy, and fun, and, like, Raffy and all this kind of stupid shit, like, we know it's manufactured and we know it's bullshit. Like, nobody acts that way. And do we want our leaders to be that way? Like, our leaders are going to have to be dealing with assholes like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and, like, are going to be making, like, large scale trade agreements and things like this. We don't want them to be like, tee-hee, aren't we so, We want them to be able to grab these guys by the balls. That's what we want. And, like, the NDP just continuously shows up and continuously drops the ball when it comes time to actually campaign, because they're chicken shit. That's all it comes down to. Like, it's one thing to stand up in the House and say this in front of your fellow parliamentarians and your fellow political people, right? And maybe make, like, a media thing for it, for, like, the policy wonks. But, you know, it takes some cojones to actually stand up in front of, like, your grandma, right? To people who don't necessarily pay attention to politics on the regular, and actually, like, make the forceful case that you're being ruled by fucking sociopaths, and maybe you should stop being ruled by sociopaths. And we'll see. We'll see if the NDP under Jagmeet Singh have the wherewithal and the cojones to actually show up or not. We'll see. The last NDPer who actually ran a decent campaign was Tommy Douglas, right? And even he didn't beat the Liberals federally, right? But at least he ran a good campaign, threatened them enough that they actually felt like they had to pass this legislation. And yeah, Jeff, my beard grows unbelievably quickly. That's why I don't mind shaving it, right? Like, I, like, shave it and it comes back, like, that. It's just like everyone has, like, a superpower, right? And I think my superpower is actually fast growing beard. Ruth, hire a woman. They have balls and aren't afraid to throw them. You might be right, though, man. Like, you might be right. Like, I just don't, like, I worry that, like, I mean, the current leadership of the NDP are largely untested, right? Like, Jagmeet Singh's last election was, like, really, really, we were just getting used to the fact that there he is, right? Like, who is this guy? There was no chance he was going to win, and everybody knew it. But this election now, I think he has a real opportunity. His sister is actually the person I hope becomes the new leader of the NDP here in Ontario. I believe it's his sister. I see her speak in the House. She's a Singh, so I've made the assumption that it's a sister. Maybe I shouldn't speak out on that, but every time she speaks, she sounds powerful, strong, connected to what's going on with the youths of today. I agree with you, actually. He's too nice. He is in an unfortunate situation, though, I think, because he, like, somebody like Tom Mulcair can afford to be forceful and can afford to be like more aggressive, right? Whereas Jagmeet Singh, yeah, the Singhs could very easily become like a dynasty in this country, right? And the reality, like, I'm kind of dancing around it, so I'm just going to state it outright, is that Canadians are racist people. Like, we like to pretend like we're not. Like, we like to pretend like we're a multicultural, accepting kind of people, but we're not. We're a colonial, imperialist, racist power. And if Jagmeet Singh there's a big concern, and I am concerned about it, that if Jagmeet Singh starts coming out and being like an aggressive political voice and starts acting like Tom Mulcair does in the House, well, his political opponents can start painting him as like a radical Islamist, right? Like a radical Sikh, and they really will take that tact if they open that up, and Canadians will accept that because we're extremely racist, right? Like we just have a lot of racist ideology and a lot of racist ways of being in the world, right? And you can see that in how, like, I mean, figures like Ben Shapiro, who's like openly racist, he's very popular, and like you have figures like Sam Harris, who says some of the most aggressively racist stuff that's been said about Islam, but if you say he's racist, he denies it. Like, it's incredible. Yeah, they'll lie, they'll say he wants Sharia, exactly, that kind of stuff, right? And then he'll spend his entire campaign deflecting and defending that, no, of course I don't want Sharia, instead of actually focusing on the issues that needs to be focused on. Yeah, I hate bad faith arguments, and it's always a liberal argument. Yeah, bad faith all around. Yeah, and it will be done in bad faith. Like, it will be, it'll just be, and the followers of those voices, right? The followers of those voices, like, they'll know that Jagmeet Singh doesn't want Sharia law. Like, they know. Like, such a stupid thing. But it's that tribalism, right? It's like, if you agree that Jagmeet wants Sharia law, then you're in the club, you know? Even though they know, like, that's aggressively stupid. Like, that's not going to happen. How long is this? Sure. Let's watch 4 minutes of Noam Chomsky.
Free elections in Gaza, and it's so great that they have free elections, which I am definitely behind. But you also mentioned how they elected Hamas, so I looked up the Hamas charter, and I just wanted to quote a few things and then see your thoughts on those. So Article 28, Muhammad is dead. He left his daughters behind. Israel, by virtue of it being Jewish and of having a Jewish population, defies Islam and the Muslims. Let the eyes of the cowards not fall asleep.
We can agree that Hamas charter is horrible, but now let's look at the Hamas charter. The Hamas charter was written by maybe half a dozen people in 1988 at a moment of an extreme Israeli attack on Gaza. It has no status. They've repeated over and over again that it doesn't apply anymore. And if you're interested in charters, why keep to that? Take the governing party in Israel, Likud. It grew out of Cherut. That's its ideological center. Begin's Cherut, Netanyahu's Cherut. Its position, never changed, is that the land of Israel, that the entire land of Israel belongs to the Jews. That includes today's Jordan. Okay? In fact, the old slogan was both sides of the Jordan. That's ours, and this is too. They've never changed that. So that's their charter. Does anybody pay attention to it?
So you've mentioned Israel's faults many times, which I think we can all agree it has significant problems. And as an activist, we want to deal with Israel's faults. But
Sorry, who? I didn't hear.
Okay, I think we can all agree that Israel has many faults. Now,
Israel has many faults.
Yeah, and that we would like to do something about that. What do you envision us also doing about Palestinian faults, and how, as an activist, can we deal with what the Palestinians have been doing, what Hamas has been doing, and what do you see with that?
Hamas are not my friends. I don't like what they do. But they've been doing not much. What they've been doing is what I described. I didn't have time to go through the pattern, but I'll repeat it. You can find it. Starting in November 2005, an agreement was reached between Israel and the Palestinian Authority then, not Hamas. Israel completely rejected it, and Hamas lived up to it, not a single rocket. Then came the January election, and Israel intensified its attack with U.S. support. After that, there are repeated attacks, Israeli attacks, and ceasefires agreements. Every ceasefire agreement is approximately like what I read. What happens is Israel completely dismisses and disregards it, maintains the siege in violation of the ceasefire, increases the violence. Hamas lives up to it, and Israel officially accepts that agrees to that, until some escalation of Israeli violence leads to a Hamas reaction, and then another episode of mowing the lawn. That's been going on since November 2005. Hamas is not a nice organization. They do a lot of rotten things. That's for the Palestinians to worry about. But it has nothing to do with us. If we were supporting Hamas, nothing, zero. If we were supporting Hamas, it would be our problem. But we're not. And what they do is for Palestinians to deal with. What we deal with is what we are doing, which is supporting massive criminal operations all over the region, blocking peace. That's for us to be concerned about. Those who...
Yeah, one of the things I really like that Noam Chomsky has always focused on is like, and people try to do this to him, and that's kind of what we just saw here, is they try to get him to focus on an issue that we don't actually have control over, right? Like, we don't actually have control over, like, the Palestinians voted for Hamas. Hamas, operates the way that it does, but we can't really do anything about that, right? Like, all we could do about that is what we're currently doing, which is just commit to a regime of genocide against them. But what I like that Noam Chomsky does is he says, well, no, like, we can't do anything about that. That's for the Palestinians. What can we do? And he always does this. It's like, what are we doing? What can we do? And he always brings it back to us, because it's so common for Westerners especially, who have been so heavily propagandized and who just live in like a delusional bubble space, to externalize evil, to externalize what is wrong in the world, and instead of saying, okay, well, what's our contribution to it? And through the reduction of our own contribution, we should see a reduction overall, right? And I love this, Barnabas. I'll buy a gnome and name it Gnome. I think that's great. Yeah. Buy a gnome and name it Chomsky. Huh? Now you're on the next level, right? And Ruth, to your point, I always thought Andrea Horwath was good. I actually agree with you. I think Andrea Horwath has exactly the problem that I'm talking about with the NDP, is that she's really good in the House. She's a really good parliamentarian. She's good at her job. She has led the NDP through really tough and interesting times, and has, in every election, it can be argued that she has had successes. So, like in the last election, like, she loses the balance of power, but she makes big successful gains in Windsor, which is a city they've never made any gains in, right? And the NDP argument is always like, okay, well, sure, we like kind of lost power overall, and like maybe we lost some seats that we had previously won, but we won a bunch of seats that we've never won, right? And that's the NDP argument, that like, oh, we won a bunch of seats we've never won. And if we can win those seats and then recoup the seats that we have won previously and like put it all together in at one time and have like an orange wave that comes at one time, then we can actually supersede and we can actually win. But Andrea's problem is that ultimately she comes across as like a substitute teacher. That's really the problem, is that when it comes time to have a debate or to see on media or any of that kind of stuff, like, she really just comes across as a substitute teacher, and people are just kind of like, I don't necessarily want to vote for, and I mean, it's not fair. It kind of sucks that that's the case, but that's the absolute real truth. Like, I I've always said like she should get like a really cool looking haircut and like start committing to more not radical but more leftist sort of language. She should lean in on it, and but I mean that's of course my position, and I think that you could counter that I think by saying that well she'll lose a bunch of centrist support if she does that. So I like Andrea. I just think she's got that classic NDP problem of their campaigning always sucks. They always suck on the campaign trail. What was I? Oh, there was another thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, yes. Everybody should go to the Katie Halper show. I love Katie Halper. She's really wonderful. But she did an interview with Norm Finkelstein. Boom, Norm Finkelstein. Norm Finkelstein is no, and I agree with you, Ruth. Like she's not a that substitute teacher type, but that is the perception that I think people get from her. Anyway, Norm Finkelstein is, if you want somebody who is going to absolutely take on every single anti-Palestinian argument or pro-Israel talking points, you really want to be looking at Norm Finkelstein. That he's been a scholar for his whole life, right? And I've been paying attention to Norm Finkelstein for a long time. And Katie Halper having him on, very timely interview, and he's a very powerful individual in his own right. So definitely worth going to Katie Halper, and at least I was a little tempted to just show this interview today, but I don't necessarily want my show to just become all about showing everybody else's stuff. So, and also there does come a point where it's like, how and is anybody else getting exhausted by the Israel stuff? Is anybody else getting a little exhausted by it? Because I am. Yesterday I slept for like 16 hours straight. I went to bed like right after the show. I think I stayed up for maybe a half hour after, and I went to bed like right after the show. I slept for 16 hours straight. And a lot of that is just like this psychological damage of dealing with this ridiculous situation. Are all McDonald's striking tomorrow? Well, I don't know. That's what an interesting thing to let's McDonald's strike. Yeah, it's tough not. That's a good thing to admit, Ruth. Like it's a good thing just to say out loud and to know about yourself. Like one of the things I'm aware about myself, like I don't want to fall into that anger and to fall into that bitterness. You know, like I don't want to become a bitter old man who's just so like enraged. And I think a big reason why I want to do this live stream is so that we all can kind of get together and vent. And find a catharsis, right? Find a catharsis in our anger, and find a way to voice and organize and focus that anger. So Brooks sums it up perfectly. I don't necessarily know who. Oh, you're talking about Michael Brooks? God rest his soul. So this is Chicago. 15 cities. Oh, yeah. The day before the fast food giant shareholders meeting, yeah. Yeah, Michael Brooks, what a loss to the left, man. What a loss to the left. He would be such a powerful voice right now. Like, he was so... There was something... I think the thing that was so scary for his opponents, right, is that Michael Brooks had such a calm, real way about him, and had a way of unifying. Like he seemed to have kind of a unifying way about him, and I never remember him like speaking ill of other leftists and finding a way to, like, there's this thing that happened after he died where, like, Sam Cedar and Jimmy Dore and Crank Uter, blanking on that guy's name, the Young Turks, they all kind of started to go after each other, and they started to kind of not have each other on in order to debate and critique one another in real time, but they would, like, take a clip and then they would kind of shit on each other in this kind of way. And Michael Brooks never really did that. Like, Michael Brooks, and in fact, Michael Brooks was the guy who kind of would go on to all of these guys' shows and would kind of, like, and have them on his show. And so he ended up being kind of like a unifying glue. And now that he's gone, these guys have kind of, like, gone off into their own corners of the internet and kind of keep throwing stones at one another. And it's like, that's not good. Like, that's not good. Yeah, he was a funny guy too. Like, he was just a likable guy. He was just, and you really would watch what he would say. You would watch what he would say, and you would want to believe him just because he seemed like such a nice guy that you want to believe. And unlike someone like Jimmy Dore, whose shtick is to alienate, like, and I think that's good. I think that it's fine to have that kind of voice in the world, to be like that alienating kind of voice. But Brooks was like the opposite of that. He didn't, like, you could disagree with him if you wanted, and he would be like, okay, well, let's talk about that disagreement. How do you disagree? Like, what is it you disagree on? And then ultimately he would, like, say, I think that you're not, like, I think you're wrong and I don't think you're using evidence, but he wouldn't say it in such a way to push people away. Unlike somebody like Dore or Cedar, who I think do actively do that. Which, again, I think that is a fine position for a commentarian to make. I'm not saying that as a critique, but just as a reality of who they are. Yeah, I'll drive. Well, maybe I will. Barnabas, do you happen to know where these McDonald's strikers are gonna be here in Toronto? Like, do you know where they're gonna be? I was gonna go down to McDonald's strikes Toronto. McDonald's Canada. I just want to know where they're going to be, right? Where. Yeah. Because, like, I would like to go and cover this without a doubt. Like, I would like to talk to some people and no, this is McDonald's talking about COVID. Because I was going to go down to Alexander Park to take a look at the tent city that's there, and maybe talk to some people there, and maybe I'll push that to Thursday if there's a strike going on. Where? Like, where? Maybe can I use the hive mind? Can I use the hive mind of the internet now to get this information? Like, where is this strike even happening? Like, because they're gonna gather somewhere, right? Like, they're gonna be somewhere. You don't just like strike. You do. This is my big complaint about all of the strikes and everything. Like, there's no centralized information. There's no way that you can go. Yeah, I do have a Discord, Barnabas. You can't link it here, but you can here. Unfortunately, I'm keeping the Discord for Patreons, right? So I am trying to come. You can't link on YouTube. This is a problem. Like, is there something I can just? search. Anyway. While we're working on this, Jimmy used to work for, the Young Turks. Sank took money from the Clinton Foundation, wanted Jimmy to lie about Syria attack. Jimmy wouldn't acquiesce. Yeah. No, the Young Turks, and the Young Turks have paid for this, right? They tilted towards corporate power, and they've paid for it. They've lost a lot of support because of that. And Jimmy Dore has been ruthless in his critique of this, which, yeah, if you take corporate money, you should be ruthlessly attacked. Yeah, I worry about Lebanon and Jordan because once Israel is done with Gaza, they'll go next. And they're open about that, like Greater Israel Project. Like, you just take a look at the Greater Israel Project, right? Like, they're not, like, anything I've seen. Like, if this is supposed to be Greater Israel, well, where's Lebanon? Where's Jordan? Right? Like, they know what's next. Oh, you're in BC, Barnabas. My bad. Okay. No, I'm over here in Toronto. It'd be great if you could come down to Toronto and we could drive around together. Yeah, dang it. So this is something to keep. Maybe I will quickly send I'm gonna quickly send a message to. Here. I'm just gonna quickly send somebody an email because I've got some contacts who are generally well connected to strikes and unions and things like this. So apologies. But this, in my view, is what this channel is about, right? It's about organizing and figuring out more information and getting more information into the public, and because like I had no idea about these McDonald's strikes, right? And if I can go tomorrow and talk to some people, because like the mainstream media is not going to talk about it. They're not going to talk to us about it. Right? They're not going to. They're going to do everything they can to make sure that we're completely in the dark about. And good for these McDonald's workers, man. Going on strike like right before a shareholder meeting. That's the way to do it, man. Like do like a 1-day strike like right before the shareholders meeting, just to tell these guys like. That we can do this. Like, we can do this if you want. Hey, Barry. Strikes. Oh, well, somebody who... Is this you, buddy? Is this you, Barnabas? Barnabas, you champion. Thanks so much for the Patreon, bud. I really do appreciate it. So I'm gonna get you into... I'm gonna get you into the Discord after the cast, bud, because I have to do that on this system, and if I were to do that, I'd have to reveal some personal information and all that kind of stuff. Solidarity, bud. Thanks so much for donating. I really appreciate it, bud. I'll get you into that Discord at the end of this live stream, okay, bud? Yeah, and then I sent an email to some of the organizers in Socialist Action. Hopefully they know more about it. Hopefully I'll be able to make that happen. If not, I'll go down to Alexander Park and do the Tent City story instead. Jeff, Sank made him pay big bucks to get his show back, so he's probably pissed. Yeah, I mean, we're fighting corporate power, right? And it's got to be heartbreaking for someone like Dore, who was in with the Young Turks before they kind of got bought out by the corporatists. Like, the Young Turks could still be a powerful organization. They could still be a powerful group working within leftist organizations. And so the loss of the Young Turks was a big loss, like a big loss, right? I think that Michael Brooks was a bigger loss, frankly, but losing the Young Turks was a big loss. And Dore is too accommodating to fake right-wing populism. I think that Jimmy Dore's, like, because Jimmy Dore is essentially just, and I'm not saying this to insult Dore, like, I'm not saying this to be mean to him. I'm saying, but it's the truth, that he's largely like an illiterate, like, he's just largely an illiterate. Like, he really, he's just he himself will tell you that he's just like a pothead comedian, right? That he's just doing this show from his basement, from his garage, rather. And where Jimmy Dore's power lies is that he has a very strong moral core, right? He has a very strong moral position that just naturally inside of him, that just is there. But when it comes to understanding, like, political theory or political positioning, he is illiterate. And that's not really a hit on him. That's just the reality of what it is to be an American living in America. And so he will have, like, the Boogaloo Boys on, right? That's probably what you're thinking, eh, Vince? Like the Boogaloo Boys, right? He'll have, like, a Boogaloo Boy on, and everybody on the left will lose their shit about it. And his position will be like, hey, well, we should be talking to these guys, right? We should be talking to these guys. And I see where Dore is coming from. Yeah, we should be talking to these guys. Because Dore's position largely is that, well, if we don't talk to these guys, then they're just going to kind of talk to themselves. And we're not really going to know how to communicate with them. Like, these guys are still our neighbors, right? These guys are still... And Dore also goes out of his way to show there is a black activist who I'm completely blanking on the guy's name, but he has this guy on his show, and he talks about, he's a black activist who actually goes and talks and befriends Ku Klux Klan members, right? And so I think Dore sees himself more like that it's not that he's accommodating right-wing populists or that kind of thing. I think he just sees that we have to actually talk to these guys. We can't just throw up the blinders, and we can't just exclude them from the conversation. And even though I think that there is, like, a bit, like, he's a bit too forgiving, I think that too forgiving comes from his sort of, like, Jimmy Dore doesn't really understand what libertarianism is in America. Like, he doesn't really understand what they're saying. And I think if he did understand what they were saying, he would be less accommodating, I think. But I think he's coming from a... he's well-intentioned, without a doubt. I think he just wants people to talk. And he's willing to take the heat to have those conversations. Seems to be just American cities, don't see any Canadian cities included. Oh, okay. That makes some sense, Jeff. Yeah. Still, though, maybe something's happening in Toronto. I mean, I'm glad to see that it's happening in America. I'm glad to see any of this striking action is happening, and their timing is really good. Barnabas, it's nice to see someone as passionate as me. I was told not to buy McDonald's tomorrow is a minimum to support, but I want to be on the streets. Yeah, that's how we do it, man. That's how we do it. You take to the streets, right? Ultimately, general strikes are the answer. Like, it's how we move the conversation back to even to the center. We've been so far right as a people for so long that the general strikes are the only thing that we can do to move it back to the center. So I have a theory question. How will the rule of a communist Canada align or conflict with First Nations claim? Wow. I mean, there's a practical consideration. We're not going to have a communist Canada. Like, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Like, that would require, like, you're talking about, like, 20 years of prolonged intentional political pressure for that kind of thing to happen. And also, just to respond to your other thing, don't buy McDonald's generally. Like, not only not only is it just really, really bad for you, it's really bad for your community. It's really bad for Western culture. It's really bad for international relations. It's really bad for the environment. It's really like there isn't a single win going to McDonald's outside of hitting that what McDonald's has structured its food intentionally and scientifically to hit what they call, within their own documentation, the bliss point, okay? And that's hitting the correct amount of fat, salt, and sugar, the correct combination of those ingredients in order to maximize the endorphin release in your body, right? And so they actually don't care how it tastes. They don't actually care about how even it looks or any of that kind of stuff. What they care about is the endorphin release, or is it the dopamine release or the endorphin? Anyway, the pleasure centers of your brain, like that, the release. That's what they actually care about, and so in a way they're like making a drug, and they know they're making a drug, and so like that's how I stopped eating McDonald's. Is once I realized like, oh, this is straight up a drug, and I'm not anti-drug, like smoke weed, drink beer, do what you want, right? All that kind of stuff. But once you realize that McDonald's is just a drug, right? Then all of the negative connections that go from that are like, oh, like there are other drugs that you can have that are not bad. like if I know a guy who grows his own weed and he sells that weed to me, that seems perfectly fine. But like McDonald's is like clear cutting the Amazon, is getting into all kinds of legal disputes, is like dispossessing people of their property and their land in order to create this drug for us to eat that ultimately, and the drug itself is extremely bad for us. It's extremely bad for us. And so, yeah, just don't buy McDonald's generally, I think. Like, I mean, we all break down. We're weak, right? Like, and we'll do it just to get that, like, moment of, like, oh, yeah, oh, God, McDonald's. Yeah, anyway. Going back to your the theory question, how would a rule of Communist Canada align or conflict with First Nations claims? Here's a hard reality about communism generally, is that communism doesn't eliminate racism. That's something that lots of communists want to pretend or will act as apologists about. And communism historically does have pretty good relations in regards to indigenous or racial rights, but it doesn't because communism is more focused on the economics, like the classes within societies. You can still end up with a communist society that will just ignore First Nations claims. So to me, you could very easily end up with communists who just ignore First Nations completely. Like, you can. My position, like, I'll speak from my position and as a communist, is that I think that we should just take a look at the First Nations claim and completely acquiesce. Like, give them that land. Like, that they have claim on this land. We have documents. There were treaties made. We should just stop bullshitting. Just be like, fine, that's your land. There you go. Right? Because as a communist, I'm anti-imperialist. I don't need to own everything. I don't need to, like, I take a look at what the Trudeau government is doing to these First Nation tribes right now. There's this unceded land that they're assaulting and attacking in order to steal more of their land. And why? So they can put a pipeline through there. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm a communist and I do want to put a pipeline through, because let's pretend as though I want to put a pipeline through, well, go around. Like, go around. Like, find a workaround. Like, what? It can't be harder to go around or find a workaround than it is to, like, send troops in and send RCMP officers in to clear these people out. Like, that seems much more difficult. So, but I really do want to fall back, Barnabas, on the idea that, like, communists do like to pretend as though it's naturally built within the theory that if a communist government came in, suddenly like the First Nations would be like, oh, so much better and all that kind of stuff. But humans are humans, and communism doesn't necessarily supersede our bigotries and our inherent races and xenophobia that exist inside of us. And so there's a cultural aspect to that we have to consistently maintain. And that's just real, right? That's just real. I don't like to bullshit. And so I am a communist. I would like to believe that a communist Canada would be nicer to the First Nations people, but we are a highly racist people in the first place, and I don't know if communism would be able to eliminate that. That's a much deeper shift. Yeah, go to Burger King. Yeah, same kind of issues with Burger King, if you ask me. But I've never seen this asked. Watch that doc, Super Size Me. Yeah, Super Size Me is a great documentary to watch. That guy, what commitment that fellow had to doing. Well, and the coffee issue is interesting because McDonald's bought Tim Hortons coffee recipe, right? The reason why Tim Hortons coffee sucks now is because McDonald's has Tim Hortons coffee now. And Tim Hortons got bought by an American company who is obviously just looking for a quick buck. Like, they don't care about like the long-term value of that product at all. And they sold the recipe, and so now their coffee sucks. Now Tim Hortons coffee sucks because it's no longer the recipe, right? It's a different thing. And of course, Tim Hortons coffee is just like coffee flavored water. It sucks. Yeah, I would only really get it if I'm completely desperate. And yeah, so like McDonald's coffee, and the reason why they bought the Tim Hortons recipe is because the Tim Hortons recipe hit that bliss point again, right? Like it figured it out. It was just like these are the correct components. And this is something I really hate about capitalism, right? Is that capitalism pretends like it is possible to endlessly innovate, right? That it's possible to take something and to you can always make it better, always. And it's just not true. That there does come a point where it's like, no, you have figured it out. Like Heinz ketchup. Heinz ketchup is exactly the right recipe for ketchup. They figured it out. It's exactly what people are looking for. It's exactly correct. To the degree of which where you have ketchup is a component of Thai food. Why am I doing that? But of Thai food. And there are 4-star chefs who have like made their own Thai food recipes, and those recipes call for ketchup, and they explicitly state within the recipe, you must use Heinz ketchup. Heinz ketchup is right. And so no one's ever going to come around and innovate a better ketchup. That's never going to happen, right? They did it. That's the best, right? And so now all that exists is the people who have own the property rights or own the intellectual rights of that, hoard it for themselves, right? And people can't like make it for themselves or make it cheaper or innovate in terms of distribution or anything like that, because the Heinz people, they own it, they have it, right? They have it for themselves. And so this idea that capitalism is endlessly innovating, it's like, but that it hits a point. It hits a point. Yeah, Ruth, I'm glad that you're good with No Name. I am like a ketchup aficionado. Like I recently that stopped because I figured out that I was gluten. I have a gluten allergy. I figured out, and so lots of the stuff that I would eat with ketchup is also gluten. And so now I'm eating less gluten, and so now I don't eat any ketchup. It's kind of a shame. I kind of miss it. I have like a bottle of ketchup that's like this full, and it's been this full for maybe a year and a half now. Maybe I should throw it away. I'm sure Timmy's has a drug center too. Why else would so money sell their soul 5 times a day? Yeah. Like they get self-ruled, but they would be capitalist. But I always say go around 2, get back, too expensive. Instructions unclear. I have now committed a revolution to my breakfast. That's good, Barnabas. I like that. Yeah, like the First Nations people here in Canada, the idea was always like that they would have their own institutions, right? They would have their own democratic institutions, and that. And in the case of, and I'm completely blanking on the name of the tribe because it's a very Waxahachie tribe, Canada. Hopefully Google will correct me. First Nation tribe, Canada. Oh, I think that's it right there. Is that it? Waka. Anyway, and it's so difficult to find information on this because nobody actually reports on it. That there is this First Nations tribe here in Canada who, and I'm so annoyed at myself that I cannot remember the name of it. It's in like British Columbia and Alberta, right? It's like over the border, and they're trying to and like they are unceded land. Like it's not even like the Canadians have jurisdiction over them, right? Like we don't have jurisdiction over them. They have their own governmental system. They operate on their own governmental way, and they negotiate, of course, as any country would, right? Because that's fundamentally what they are. They're fundamentally their own nation and their own country, and we're invading them, and nobody talks about it. And of course nobody talks about it because people like me can't remember the friggin' name of the tribe. Drives you crazy. Yep, we go between whites and anyone else that is a majority, or a minority, right? Have their own police, pretty lit. Yeah, like, they're their own community, right? They're their own country. Anyway. Stephen Harper, pretty sure he was sent long-form census on purpose. Once again, the Beaverton. Absolutely nailing it. Thank you, E-Enterprise is value very cool. My feeling, confused and not knowing jack shit about COVID in Ontario and overwhelmed by the numbers. Daily COVID update. Oh, yeah. This is, our Ontario does really well with its COVID updates. We actually hit 1,600 cases today, which is actually a milestone for Ontario. We've been above 2,000 for so long. We were above 3,000. We hit 4,000 at one point. So it's a big deal to get sub 2,000. And of course, the Ford administration is using this like dip down as an excuse to be like, oh, okay, we're dipped down. Now let's plan opening. Hey, everybody, we're opening. Hey, all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, whoa, chappy, right? Like, I want to see like some long form, like sub 1,000 numbers before we start popping open and start thinking like, oh, we're good, right? No. These conservatives, man, they're just so willy-nilly. Like, they do not give a fuck. The reason people don't like billionaires is because they're hoarding resources in a world where people are starving, living outside, not being able to afford life-saving medical care. Money isn't some neutral, abstract symbol. It represents resources. It's immoral to hoard it. Yeah. I mean, money is a neutral, abstract symbol, right? But it also does represent resources. So, okay. But yeah, like, the very existence of a billionaire is itself immoral. Like, it just is. Like, it's like torture, right? Torture is itself immoral. It justifies itself as immoral. Like, you don't need to create a moral argument about why torture is immoral. It is immoral. It justifies itself as immoral. And in the same way that billionaires do, right? Like, if you are a billionaire, you are immoral. And that's just true. Period. Like, you have stolen wealth and hoarded it, and you are withholding it from other people, and it gets worse the worse the conditions of the people you are withholding your wealth from get, right? Yeah, we're costing his friends money, though. Yeah, right, exactly. Still no vaccines here, even though we were supposed to get a new shipment. Ruth, you're out in Mississauga, is that right? What's your opinion on money and currency? Money isn't real, right? Money's not real. Currency's not real. It's something that is created. It's typically created by the state. Although I look at it more like I look at writing, right? Like writing isn't like real. It's not like a tangible resource or something. It's just something that comes out of humanity that we write. Like if you think of it, it's like a technology or it's like an advancement in human communication. And money and currency operates on those lines, right? Like how we'd value your monthly, will there be a currency without money? Like how we value your monthly ration. Oh, I kind of see what you're saying here. Like if we were to get rid of money, would there still, like if we were to get rid of money, like I completely disagree with leftists and communists generally who say that if we get rid of money, things will be easier. Because no, like if you get rid of money, then a common currency will just appear, right? That people use common currency to facilitate trade with one another. They just do that. That just exists. There's a great video game series called the Fallout series. Has a really amazing commentary on this, and it's amazing because it's just like part of the game experience where they trade in bottle caps. Bottle caps is their currency, right? And bottle caps are fundamentally worthless. They don't really mean anything, but because there is sort of a limited quantity of them, they end up being the way that people facilitate trade with one another. And if you were to get rid of like the American dollar or the Canadian dollar, a similar thing would occur. We would all agree with one another that there, and we know that this is true because, and this is an odd example, but it's absolutely the truth. Video games, whenever there's been an economy that appears in video games, there is always like an item or something that the game itself generates that become the common currency, right? Like the old school like Diablo Stone of Jordan kind of stuff, right? Like so there's always a so you can't get rid of money, because if you get rid of money, the populace itself will just replace the money with something else. But at the same time, our society has worshipped money. Like we worship money, and we treat money as though it is itself an item. It is itself some kind of intrinsic valuable commodity, instead of as a tool, right? That money is a tool that we use to facilitate trade, right? That like I don't necessarily want like go back to the idea of like barter, right? That I have 3 chickens. I want some milk, right? So I want to give you a chicken and get some milk, but maybe the guy who is giving the milk doesn't want a chicken, right? Like so, to facilitate this trade, we have this kind of common currency. So I give him the money that is about the value of his milk, and he takes the money that he can then turn around and get the thing that he wants with, right? But if you have this money worship society that we have, then we withhold money from people. We treat, like, if somebody has $1 billion money, like if they have $1 billion, then they're supposed to be a good person, right? And we don't actually look at, like, the systems of how this occurred. We don't take a look at, like, and we refuse as a society to say, well, no, a person cannot have all the money. Right? A person cannot have access to all of the money, right? That there needs to be limits. This is just a tool that we're using to facilitate trade with one another. It's not a moralizing agent, right? And if we give a person the ability to accrue all of the wealth for themselves, then the money ceases to have value, and it devalues it, and it ceases to be used for what it exists for intrinsically, which is just to facilitate trade with one another. That, like, I want some carrots, or I want, and somebody else wants some apples, right? So instead of using more rudimentary, ham-handed systems of rationing, right, where, like, I will give everybody 1 carrot, 1 apple, and 1 pork chop, right? And 1 loaf of bread, let's say. So apple, carrot, pork chop, loaf of bread, right? And then there's a person who's like, well, I don't really want this apple, right? And then there's another person who's like, well, I don't really want this carrot. And then like they try to find some way to trade with one another within these confines of the same, and then it's very clumsy and it's very ridiculous. Instead, you have a market and you say everybody gets 10 coin, right? Just 10 numbers, right? And you go and you exchange those numbers into the market for whatever you want. And we, as a people, seem to say, yeah, that's the best way of doing this. But the problem comes when the numbers don't loop back into the populace, right? When the numbers are withheld from the populace unless we sell ourselves to the market, and then the market itself has been completely dominated by these billionaires who hoard the numbers explicitly to enslave us in a wage slave system. And that's what it is. It's a wage slave system. And we could ameliorate this. Something like a basic income ameliorates this, as well as something as like a maximum tax. Like, I'm a communist, right? So I think that any earnings above $1 million, we should literally just say, no, you're good. You made $1 million this year, you're good, off you go, right? The rest of it, no. We'll cycle that back into the populace. You don't need it, right? And we can create stabilized systems. We can create stable financial systems by operating that way. Have a minimum amount that everybody gets through something like a basic income, but then also have a maximum where we just say, no, you're good. Like, we don't want... I don't understand why anyone defends a system that says a person should be able to get access to this much wealth. We don't accept kings. We don't accept emperors. We don't accept like fiat dictators or any of this, but we do accept like hereditary generational wealth to a degree that turns them into a king. Like, no, that's stupid, and we should get rid of it. Which is what I'm hoping the NDP here in this country is going to start pushing on that. They've already said they want to increase wealth taxes on the wealthy. I mean, we should tax them out of existence. And and my favorite part about this is they'll start to whine and be like, well, then we'll just leave. And my response has become, great, I'll pack your bags. Like, get the fuck out of here. Do us a favor, get out of here. Nope, near Ottawa, but not the right county, so we can't go there. Oh, that's the worst, isn't it? Are you like near the border, Ruth, where you're like, it's like right there, but there's like some kind of bureaucratic thing that's preventing it from happening? I hope not. That's very frustrating. Like I said, Ford likes to keep his shit in the hood and screw everyone else. Yeah. Well, I just take a look at what he's trying to build a highway up north of Toronto that nobody wants. Nobody wants this highway, right? But why is he building the highway there? It's because his buddies own the land, right? So his buddies all own this land, right? And so they're going to be able to sell the land to the government, i.e. the Ford administration, and the Ford administration is going to be like, yeah, that land is worth $1 gajillion, right? And so his buddies will walk away with a whole bunch of money, and then he'll be able to take money and give it to his construction buddies, right? And so they'll make a huge premium on it, and in the end they'll build this road that no one will use, and it'll be completely worthless. You can't have both money and socialism, Ryan. I completely disagree. I think that money supersedes. Like, money is an intrinsic human creation, much like writing. It comes out of us. It's just something that we do. And every single time any society has actually attempted to remove money, the populace just makes some other kind of money, right? We just make money. We want to. We want money to exist, and it's too useful, but it does need to operate. Oh, guys, I'm so sorry. Just give me 1 second. I need to go blow my nose. This is getting ridiculous. One moment. And Ryan, You should take a look at David Graeber's work. David Graeber has done, God rest his soul, yet another loss for the left. David Graeber, too early. He died when he was like only in his late 50s or early 60s, if I recall. He is an economist who is really deeply entrenched in the Occupy Wall Street movement. He was one of the organizers, and he did really good work with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And you should take a look at David Graeber's work, because he talks about this very prolifically. Some folks believe they own land. More accurately, they own a deed, a piece of paper. Yeah, like a promissory note. Yeah. You're talking about labor vouchers, not money. I mean, what is money if not a labor voucher, right? Like it's those two things. I don't necessarily see how they're separate from one another. We're very good at doing this. We're very good at creating new words for things that are the same and pretending like they're distinct when they're not really. Barnabas, I had this idea too. Make $5 million, boom, 150 offshore profit to the people. Yeah, like but because we like the once you get that trickle down economics, the whole concept of trickle down economics is a farce. It's just a fraud. It was just a propaganda piece for the wealthy to extract wealth from the populace for themselves, right? Once you accept that's just true, then then you begin to explore, well, okay, if that's false completely, like unrepentantly, there's not even a piece of it that's true, well, then what is an economy? And how does economics actually work? And you begin to see that the trickle-down economists actually inverted it. That an economy is actually from the bottom up. It doesn't trickle down. It bubbles up, right? That's how an economy actually works. And how you collapse an economy is you have it pool in small places, right? That the wealth being offshored into an offshore account where nobody can access it. That's how you collapse an economy, right? So what you do is you have everybody gets access to the wealth, it bubbles up, and then it bubbles up back into the state, right? It bubbles up into the state apparatus that created the currency in the first place. It created the money in the first place so that they can redistribute it. And then it cycles around, right? It cycles around in that way. And if you look throughout history, there's tally sticks. I don't know why I keep doing this tally sticks. Anyway, tally sticks. Tally sticks were used throughout feudal Europe as a system of money for centuries. And it was like the most stable system, economic system that had been created, because it was tally sticks were distributed into the populace. And they were literally sticks. And there was a certain, like a small amount of them, and or a set amount of them. And then every year, everybody would take the tally sticks and give them back to the king so that he could put them in the larger measure stick. There's a measure stick that these tally sticks slotted into to ensure that there was no counterfeiting. And then they would just redistribute the money back into the populace, because they understood that the purpose of the money was to make sure everybody had access to goods. That's it. Like, everybody has access to goods, period, right? And that's a stable system, because it goes back to the state. The state makes sure there's no counterfeiting. They redistribute it. Everybody uses it. And of course, tally sticks would pool. Like, of course they would. That's why they do it annually, right? To make sure that the pooling stops, and then they redistribute it out. And that's a more efficient, stable system. Whereas the system we've got now is just like, it's designed to collapse, as it has done several times. And the state keeps trying to prop it up, but it's not going to work. Like, eventually it's going to fail. 5 minutes. Oh, Ruth, if I crossed the border, it would take me 15 minutes to get a vaccine in Messina. Dang, man. Dang, eh? That makes it harder, if you ask me. That makes it way harder, if you ask me. Like, just being like just on the other side of the border, you're seeing like a lot of action going on here. I would think you're near you're near Ottawa though. I would think that they would, but you're more rural, are you, Ruth? You're kind of in a rural place. How annoying! How annoying! Labor vouchers are based on labor time, not exchange value. When they are exchanged for goods or services, they get canceled out of existence, and therefore can't be accumulated. Yeah, like I mean, what Ryan? I think what you're talking about and what I'm talking about are like pretty close to the same thing, and that you and I both kind of or not disagree, but you and I both see that the way that the monetary system is operating now is not what people actually want the monetary system to actually be, right? That we that what you're describing, the idea that like, yeah, a labor voucher based on labor time, so I've done some work, so I get a voucher for the time that I put in, and that they can't be accumulated and like piled up, right? And when I use them, they just sort of disappear. And ultimately, the system that you're describing would need to be supported by the state, right? Like, and fundamentally, it would be the state that would create these labor vouchers, right, for everybody to have access to. I am a proponent that people should just have access to these vouchers in the first place, right? That food and shelter should just not be withheld from the populace. It just should be assumed. And a big reason I think that's the case is because a lot of the creative systems are being automated. And a lot of the creative systems, like, it used to be that for us to create our food as a populace, you needed like 90% of the populace doing that. Like 90% of the populace needed to be in the field working to create food and shelter, right? And under these circumstances where everyone needs to be doing it, it's completely reasonable to say like everybody has to work. Everybody's got to be doing it, right? The creation of food and shelter is so important for our society. Most of us do it. It's what we do. Now it's only like 2-3%, right? We've automated that process. It takes way less popular manpower to actually make food, right? It doesn't take that much. Even if that number was 30%, right? That's a huge decrease in the amount of labor power required to create our food because we've automated the process. And because we've automated this process now, well, you would think that an irrational society would be like, oh, we've automated this process. So either we can have less people doing it or we can have everybody involved in it, but it's taking less time, right? That instead of me going out and working in the field every single day, I can go out and work in the field 3 times a week, like 3 days out of the week or something like this, right? Such is the degree that we have diminished the amount of labor required for our agricultural system to actually function. But instead of that, we've still insisted that everyone needs to be constantly working for the capitalist system. And so you end up with people who like spend their whole life making lattes, who are just like, again, I'm going to suggest go take a look at David Graeber's work because he's made and you can find him on YouTube. He popularized the concept of bullshit jobs, just jobs that are being done for no reason at all. They're just total bullshit, and they're just wasting people's time as an excuse to ensure that like, well, you know you need to get money by working. So and of course, if you start saying like people should just have access to food and shelter without the need for work, well, you're called all kinds of names, right? And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, you prefer this system of withholding food and shelter from people unless they sell themselves into a market system dominated by billionaires? Like, it's wage slavery, and we should call it as such. And maybe we ended up there honestly. I don't think we did, but but even if we did, we should look at it and we should just say, like, no, like, people should have food and shelter. They should just have that. And I don't know why that's considered a radical or a strange position, and I think that ultimately you and I will probably see eye to eye on these subjects more than we disagree. Ward, just like the gold standard or oil standard for currency, perhaps a land standard could open up some possibilities. Or it could be a very bad idea. Yeah, money is, and a part of the reason why fiat currencies, like, money doesn't need to be tied to anything. Like, it just, and tying it to any kind of commodity or any kind of item, like gold or oil or land, right? I just feel like you're opening up your monetary system to conflict. Like, so if it comes down to whoever has the most gold, well, then you're going to go fight a war to get a gold mine, right? Or if it's a land thing, well, then you're going to fight a war to get more land, right? And whereas, like, a fiat currency where it's just money is created, and that's the system we live in now. Money is just created; it comes out of thin air. You just, and there it is, right? Well, that kind of system, you can stabilize it as long as the people who are operating within the system want to see it stabilized, which we don't. We very much are disinterested in actually stabilizing the system. We really like, and it's so funny because the people who are most interested in destabilizing it are the people who are the social, or the fiscal conservatives, right? The people who think, oh, we need to balance the budget, we need to cut the deficit, all this kind of stuff. It's like, that's how you destabilize everything. You don't understand what deficits are. Like, these jobs are servant jobs to the rich. Exactly. That's exactly right, Ruth. They erected a servant system so that they didn't need to directly own slaves, right? They don't need to own servants and feel guilty about the ownership of these people directly. Instead, you can create a market. You can create a system of servitude and a system of slavery so that you cannot feel guilty about having servants, even though you do. Like, if you're going to these places like these McDonald's or these Tim Hortons or anything, like, those are your servants. They work there, and there's this implicit built-in cultural thing where the customer is always right? Where the servants need to be nice to you no matter what. And so you're given carte blanche to be assholes to these people, right? And to treat them like garbage. And that's built in intrinsically, right? And no manager is going to show up and, like, you know, if you walk in as a customer and start berating the servants, the workers, the employees, right? The manager will come out and they'll smooth things over and make things better and all, okay, and I'm glad you came, and all that kind of stuff. He's not going to come out and chew this person out. He's not going to come out and tell them they're being an asshole, get the hell out of here, right? That's not how it works. That's not what happens, right? And it's because implicitly the system is structured so that you have servants, right? It's a wage slave system, and people, especially imperialist Westerners, like it that way because it removes the direct ownership of guilt from the situation. They don't need to feel bad about owning slaves because it's, oh, I'm not the one that's owning it. I'm just whatever system exists in McDonald's, that's their problem. I can just be separated from that. But the reality is that it's a servant system. It's a wage slave system. They own these people. If you give people food and shelter, it frees them up to do the kind of unalienated work they want to do. That's exactly right, Ryan. That's exactly right. That people want to work. People want to work. They want to focus on the work. Like, everybody has inside of themselves an intrinsic desire to focus on something, to focus on some kind of thing. And the capitalist structure has done everything it can to pretend as though the work that comes naturally and innately from a person is not work, right? That the only thing that can be defined as work is something that benefits the capitalist class directly. That if you're not working for capitalists, it's not work. And there are 100 examples that you can give of how that's completely false, right? Raising children, being a mother, like volunteering at a shelter, like none of that is work. Like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Volunteer fire department, right? That's not work. What the hell are you talking about? Like, and of course, I can't come up with anything else off the top of my head. But the examples are there, and the more you look at it, the more you begin to see, like, society relies more on people doing that unpaid work than it does on these capitalists who are just a parasite on the side of the society, right? And the idea that if the capitalists suddenly went away, we would stop doing like basic labor that is required, like I think it's childish. I think that's a really childish view of how society actually is. That every society throughout all time has wanted there to be a sanitation department and has done everything it can to solve the problem of sanitation in its society. And we actually find that if capitalists get involved in that, capitalists aren't getting involved in it to improve it. They're getting involved in it to parasite it, to parasiticize it, to say, oh, you have a functioning system that's worked for a millennia. Well, that doesn't directly profit me, so I'm going to find a way to wedge myself in there, make the system worse, so that I can get a bunch of money and go golfing. That's capitalism. Like, that's how it works. Jeff, it's been legislated away by the cons and the libs. Both neocon parties take money from the same donors, meeting with the same lobbyists. Yeah, like what you just said there, Jeff, one of the things that is really opening my heart and making me feel better about how our life is going is that kind of statement is becoming more understood. More and more people are beginning to see that the conservatives and the liberals are allies, right? That the political separation between them is simply color, right? And they'll like have disagreements on gender issues, right? Or on identity issues. But when it comes to economics, like, as far as the liberals are concerned, yeah, you can be a black transgender feminist, right? Be a black transgendered feminist as long as you show up to work on time, right? Consumers are employers. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, there's this idea, Ward, of the wealthy are job creators, right? The job creator myth. But it's completely false. The wealthy don't create jobs. Consumers create jobs. And if consumers don't have access to the market, if they don't have any money, right, then that's how you collapse an economy, right? If you pool all the money over here, withhold it from everybody, nobody has any money, they're spending all their money on rent and food, right? Well, then they're not going to spend it into their local economy. They're not even going to spend it at Amazon to get like little trinkets or doodads, right? That's like really, really basic Marx stuff, right? That Marx understood that eventually capitalism creates a system by which it will create goods, but the people who are creating the goods won't be able to afford to buy them. And so the whole thing comes apart. Jeff, man, you inspire me, Jeff. You do. You inspire me. Every time you come in here and you start talking to me about your job and you start talking about how you work in the shelters and everything like this, and that I'm so happy to hear that you're in that situation. You love your job. Wow. Thanks for being here, bud. Thanks. I should set up an interview with you, Jeff, to talk about the shelters and to talk, because nobody talks about that, right? We should get on that. Anyway, that's just a thought. Ruth, that's why the libs and commons are fighting over it. Who will serve them? Yeah. Well, and they both go to the same place. They go to the same, like, country clubs, right? Like, the liberals and the conservatives go to the same country clubs. You know, they have no ideas. Like, this is one of the things that I think is becoming more and more obvious. It's like, neither of these people have ideas or thoughts that as far as both the liberals and the conservatives are concerned, the system is working as intended, okay? That they want it to be this way, and so it will be this way. And it didn't always used to be this way, right? Like, I come from Manitoba, and in Manitoba there was a conservative government back in the 60s. This is like back when there's like the Red Tories, right? And they created an education system in Manitoba, might have been the 50s, but anyway, they created an education system in Manitoba that tripled the budget. It tripled the budget of Manitoba. right? And if you created, like if you tripled the federal budget today, people would lose their fucking minds about it, right? If you tripled your provincial budget now, people would lose their minds about it. But now we're like 50, 60, 70 years out from that, and everybody's like, yeah, education system. Like, what are you talking about? We need that. Like, it's super important to have that. Like, and it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be the case that you're going to create a new system. It's going to increase the budget, which everybody thinks is like this, oh my God, you're increasing the budget. But really, when you stop and think about it, you're going like, yeah, we're spending money in the public sector because the private sector won't, right? That's what they're doing. That the private sector won't spend money to help you. Like, they're not going to do that. So the public sector will, right? It's very simple. Yeah, they both said no to a ceasefire in Gaza. Yeah, exactly, because they're both imperial powers, right? They both understand that it's important for the imperial West to have a military base in the Middle East. Like, Joe Biden, when he was younger, said it as clear as day, right? He said that if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create one, and it's exactly the case. And so this what's going on in Gaza is just a continuation of the clearing out of this military base that they are building in the Middle East. And the idea of and they can't have an enemy people living in the military base that they want to have, so they got to clear them out, which is what they're doing. Like, the project in Gaza is the extermination of those people, right? That's the point. And the liberals and the conservatives both agree. But are consumers also evil employers? I mean, the trouble comes from the concentration of wealth and private power, right? When like, the consumers can make a demand for a good, right? All they want. They can say like, hey, I want I want a doodad. Let's just say doodad. Make it as abstract as we can, right? Let's get specific. Doodads. But consumers are not necessarily interested in like how to make the sausage, right? They don't care how the doodad, or they don't necessarily know how the doodad gets made. And if you cede that to a private creator, right? The private creator their objective is only for profit. They're not interested in making the best doodad or making a doodad that everyone is actually even looking for. They just want to make a doodad that's going to make them the most amount of money. And if that means going, over to China or India and enslaving a group of people there so that you can have those doodads made for free or for a penny, they will do that. And that comes about because the consumer isn't connected to the method of the creation of the doodad in the first place, right? The consumers aren't the ones, like, Western consumers aren't the ones making the doodads. And perhaps they should be. Perhaps the people who are actually demanding the doodad in the first place should be involved in the creation process of said doodad, right? Perhaps the state should have more control over that and employ its own people in for the creation of said doodads. And perhaps it would be the case that if the consumers themselves were more directly connected to the productive system, they would actually look at what it would take to make these things and go, maybe it's not worth it. Like, maybe, is it worth all of the time and the effort and the resources and all this to get this doodad? I think, or maybe they would sacrifice profitability for durability or repairability, right? Maybe they would make concessions to certain ideas that, like, maybe it's a good idea that if we have this doodad and we're all putting our effort into it, and when I say all of us, I mean, like, literally the people that you live with and you work with and you, like, go to church with, these people, maybe we should make a product that is of a better quality, higher durability, not so disposably focused on, can be repaired easier. And yeah, sure, it'll take more time and more effort and more and be more costly to us, but I think we want to have a better kind of thing. And I think if the consumer was more directly connected to the creation of the goods that they consume, which we're not. We're completely disconnected from the reality of how any of this works. We would end up in a better spot, I think. That would make them overqualified. Brains aren't necessary for a government job. Come on, Ruth. Come on. That's mean. That's mean. I do kind of see where you're coming from a little bit. Like, it's tough. It would be. I could never be like a government bureaucrat, right? Like, I could never be a government bureaucrat, because you know that you encounter certain situations that are stupid and very time consuming and very difficult, because there's like an oversight on page 3, section 4A, there's like a typo or something, or it refers to a document that no longer exists. You know, like these sorts of difficulty kind of stuff. Okay, by June 14th, we can have a gathering at home and everything will be opened up. Okay, my bet is we are closed up by August. Yeah. School doesn't start again by fall and Ford blames us all. Yeah. Like, yeah. I mean, it's actually more likely in my view that, like, the summer is relatively quiet. And because the summer will be quiet, everyone will be like, get those kids back to school. And then we'll get the kids back to school, and kids are gross snot factories, right? And then we'll get like another kick up. We'll have like another fourth wave. But if you'll recall, like the second wave, they didn't close up anything over the second wave, right? Capitalism needs Christmas. I will always remind everybody of this, right? Christmas is not a Christian holiday. It is not a Christian holiday. It is a capitalist holiday. And capitalism requires Christmas. If everybody just stopped buying each other gifts for Christmas, it would be the end of capitalism. Capitalism would stop functioning because they require it. They require this sort of mania of gift buying that occurs over Christmas. It's the backbone of the capitalist system. And which is why I don't make any friends doing this, but I've told everybody in my life, like, I don't buy gifts for Christmas. I don't celebrate Christmas. Like, Christmas isn't a holiday for me, right? I've been a retailer most of my life. Christmas is not a holiday for me. And I don't buy people gifts because I think that if we wanted to be true revolutionaries, we would just not celebrate Christmas. Christmas would be over, right? And Christmas should be over for the revolutionary left. Like, just stop participating in this capitalist grift. And it's 100% what it is. Like, the image of Santa Claus, like the red and white with the nose and all that kind of stuff, was created by Coca-Cola, for God's sakes. Like, he's 100% a capitalist figure in the system. And people are starting to kind of put this together a little bit more and more, that, like, Family Guy actually did like a really interesting episode on this thing that I'm talking about right here. How this mania for gifts over Christmas is actually completely destructive to the central idea of capitalism, of Christmas generally. And capitalists use our desire for niceties to, like, we want to be nice to one another and give each other gifts and have this one moment where we share a piece of ourselves with one another. Well, they use that idea of compassion and that idea of love against us in order to profit off of us, because capitalists have no soul. The customer is always right breeds contempt for the server. Yeah, it for sure does, right? Because it implicit within the statement is that the customer is above the server, that the customer knows more. Their wants supersede it's a class-based statement on its face. The customer is always right? That creates a class of people who are always correct. And who are the people who are always correct? The people with the money making the demand, right? Who is subservient to the customer? The server, right? And their name is server. They're a servant. They're there to serve, right? So it's like the customer is always right is a complete classist slogan, right? That facilitates this ongoing class war, and keeps it up. My grandbaby is the only person in our family that gets something other than a good meal with family. Yeah, or a god meal. A god meal. the good meal, Ruth. Sorry, God meal. It's just such a funny word. It's just a funny kind of turn of phrase. God meal. Yeah, and the good meal, right? The dinner, the getting together with family, right? Like I come from a divorced family, and so and it's like a divorced rural family, so there was always a lot of and I don't think it was intentionally done this way, but I think it's absolutely true that it was like there was a lot of like dick measuring. It was a big pissing contest, right? Everybody had to have their own meal, and everybody had to have their own Christmas. So like me as a kid, I'm like, instead of getting that one big family get together, right? There's like my dad's place, then my mom's place, then my grandma's place, then my aunt wants to have one, and then there's like the friends over here, and then everything was sort of in their own like pocket, and it's all like a big pissing match, and by the end of it you're just fucking sick of it. So I would really, really love like the idea of like a big family gathering where you have like the big family meal and all that kind of stuff is lovely, but I feel like and a lot of that is like, again, a capitalist kind of mode where like I have all of this stuff and I need to show it off. I need to show off my big house. I need to show off how successful I am. I need to show all of this off to everybody. But like ultimately it didn't matter. Like none of that mattered. Like what mattered is that you were here supporting one another as family, right? Like that's what mattered. But that sense of alienation creeps in even there. Barnabas, devil's advocate. Uh-oh. The customer is always right is meant for if they want the bag in black, don't fight them, that the customer wants green. If they want the bag in black, don't fight them, that the customer wants green. I mean, I think I see what you're saying. Like if the customer wants something, it's just in the best interests of the business to provide it. It's like in theater, there's this give the people what they want, right? That there's this there's something that happens in artists where the artist wants to create something and the artist is like, okay, this is what I want to create and I'm going to present it and all this, and the audience just doesn't respond to it. They just are like, okay. But there's this thing that you're doing within the confines of your creation that the audience rather is like, oh, I love that. I love that. This is so great. And then maybe the artist is like, but that's so stupid or juvenile or I don't really care for it or all that kind of stuff. But every single time you do it, it's like the audience is like, yeah, that's what I want. And so give the people what they want, right? And that's a real theatrical, artistic concession ultimately that like, because sometimes like as an artist, like what you want to be doing and what the customer wants or what the audience wants doesn't necessarily align. And in that way, like, you should, as an artist, subserviate, if you like, to the demands of the audience. Because one of the hard lessons to learn as an artist is that your audience is correct. Like, the mob is correct. Like, if you go out on stage and you're a comedian and you tell a bunch of jokes and there are jokes that nobody laughs at, well, get rid of them, right? Because they suck. Even if you like them. Even if you're like, no, these jokes are great. If nobody laughs at them, then they suck and they don't work. And the audience will tell you that. The audience is correct. And it's how I feel about my music. Like, I play songs. And I go out on stage and I'll play a song, and it's a song I've worked hard on. It's a song I believe in. It's a song that I've put a lot of energy and my own power in. And I can tell when I'm sitting there and I'm playing the song, I can tell not only during the song, but I can tell by the response of the audience after the song is over. Like, I know if this song is good or not, and it doesn't matter how much I believe in it, that I know whether or not it's good. And I can usually tell after about 3 or 4 performances whether or not I'm going to keep playing that song. Because I know if it sucks or not. And that's why I hate this digital format for I think I'm going in a direction that you didn't want me to, Barnabas, but you know what, forget it. It's my live stream, I'm going to say what I want. So I really don't like this digital format. Because if I were to play for a song for you guys right now, I would have literally no way of knowing if it was good or not. Like maybe in chat you guys would be like, oh, that was great, or any of that kind of stuff, but it's so I could just end up playing a bunch of songs that suck, and I would just have no feedback mechanism. I would have no way of actually knowing, and so I've been very tepid or tentative to want to get involved artistically through digital medium, right? With the exception of this way. I don't know if that's kind of what you were interested in, Barnabas, but Saint Nicholas, patron saint of pawnbrokers. Fact. Is he? Oh, that's fun. Oh, yeah, and of course, being a servant and a server can be a noble pursuit. Of course it can. Of course it can. Like, there are people who, like, the people who are serving the queen, for example, right? The queen has servants, right? If you go and you talk to those people, they're very invested in that, right? And there is a nobility to it, for sure there is. Again, I have been a retailer, amongst other things, but I've been a retailer. I used to kind of believe that retailing and being that kind of person was such a denigrated kind of thing, but I began to encounter people, and one person in particular, I won't mention his name here, but one person in particular, I encountered him, and he was an older gentleman who was getting into kind of retirement age, and I would talk to him, and it was very obvious to me that he saw retailing as, exactly as you say, as like a noble profession, as what, because if you really like think about what retailing is, right? You are providing a service for your community, that you are part of a structure, right? A service structure. People come in and they want I knew that was going to happen if I started talking about that, Ward. You know what? Because it's you, Ward. Fuck. What does everybody else think? Like, what does everybody else think? Are people going to tolerate that? Is there I wish I knew how to do a poll. How many people are even in here? 8. Have I heard of the organization Fight Back? That's creating a glimmer in my mind space. Okay. You know what? I'll play a song. I think I need to tune my guitar, but I can do that. Okay. Come on. My pick is stuck. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that needs to be tuned. That needs to be tuned. Guitar tuner. That needs to be tuned. Oh man, I haven't performed for people in like... I haven't performed for people in a year and a half? Oh my god. I should have kept my mouth shut. Well, because you guys are so wonderful, I'm going to perform for you guys a song that I've been working on for about a year now. I've performed it for nobody. You will be the first group that is hearing it. I'm pretty confident it's a good song. I feel like it captures the teen spirit. That's right. That's exactly right. I do a really killer version of "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time." Stairway to Heaven, yeah. I feel like every guitarist has to know what you gotta know. If you don't know, then you're good enough. Okay, I'm gonna pull back a little bit here because I have a very big voice. And I'm worried if I'm too close, it's gonna really blow things up. This is a song that I made about a year ago. I feel like it captures the spirit of this last year. Another month inside this car. The wage they pay me with don't get me very far. The chains that hold me break me down, but they don't scar. Can't even drink away my blues inside a bar. And this year sucks. This year sucks. Can you blame a man for trying to give it up? This year sucks. Another day won't help that pain inside your back. The days get harder, but it's too hard to keep track. They keep you tired before your soul opens a crack. And God don't care what monkeys think about the facts. And this year sucks. This year sucks. Can you blame a man for trying to give it up? And this year sucks. So sit atop your pile of bones and bloody gold, and human sacrifice don't stop you being old. At least you'll die before the bomb you set explodes. We're gonna burn to death while doing what we're told. And this year sucks. This year sucks. Can you blame a man for trying to give it up? And this year sucks. It burns down anyway. It burns down anyway. It burns down anyway. It burns down anyway. Yeah. Yeah, and that's that. Oh. Ugh. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, yeah, Barnabas, I'm terrible at collaborating. I'm a terrible at collaborating. Oh, Jeff, like, it's the simplest song to play. It's like A minor, F, G, E. It's super simple, and that's something I really try to focus on in my work generally. Like, there are some artists who like they want to live in like this kind of other outwardly space, and they want to constantly be pushing what does or does not constitute music. Whereas for myself, like, music is about expressing like if you go into that chakra stuff, it's about finding the energy that lives and yeah, I know, Ruth. I know. I got some lungs on me. That's why I had to back up, because I've blown up a couple of mics in my life. I've blown up a couple of mics in my life, and it's just one of those things that you learn to accept about yourself, and I can't not do it that way, you know? Like, anytime I encounter like, Bon Iver got really popular for a little while, and he's got more of a falsetto sort of stuff. And I tried to live there for a little while in that kind of falsetto space, and that very quiet kind of thing, but I just couldn't. There's just too much air and too much energy coming out. I can't help it, and honestly, I find that some of the simpler songs, played in the more straightforward kind of way, can be some of the more powerful songs, right? Like, 16 Tons is a song that I play a lot, and that's a song that has like just an enormous power to it. 16 Tons is just like, it's a song that's written by people who have essentially been enslaved in coal mines. They come to the they come to the but yeah, Ward, I mean, like, okay, back to each according to their need, but I feel like the two are inextractable from one another. Like, art and communism, art and philosophy and art, like, these things can't be extracted from one another, because like the beauty of art is that it's always, like, if it's popular, if people are gravitating to it, there's something truthful going on, right? Whether or not like, and it's funny to say, but like, you look at people like Nicki Minaj, or like, who's an artist that everybody kind of just like sloughs off? Somebody like Britney Spears, right? Like, Backstreet Boys, right? Just these artistic forces that everybody kind of rolls their eyes about. But even they are saying something real and truthful, and are hitting on something tangible. And even if it is cynically done, and even if it has this kind of corporate cynicism about it, there's still something very real and tangible that speaks to humanity. And that's the beauty of art, is that it can't not be that way. And Jeff, I don't have a SoundCloud or any way to listen. As I was saying before, like, I've been very suspicious of going digital with music. Maybe I will. And I've been living in a situation where I haven't been able to do any recording because things were too, things were bad. But now I've got this space, so maybe I'll change my mind on that, and maybe put something out that, I don't know, I like. And but talking about 16 Tons again, because I actually think that this is a really interesting story. There's a song, 16 Tons, that gets made, and it gets made by Virginia coal miners during the colonization period in the United States. And what would happen is the coal mines would send out pamphlets across Europe and the United States saying, offering high wages, right? High wages for coal mining work. And that was actually accurate. They would pay a high wage, right? But what they wouldn't tell these people and many of these people are like selling their entire life savings and like getting onto like a cart with a horse, right? in order to spend weeks to travel to these mines. And so they're isolated, right? And they would end up there, and they would work the job. And of course, what the coal mining companies wouldn't tell anybody is that the coal mining company also owned all the housing in the area, and they also owned what's called the company store, right? They would own the Virginia. They would own the goods distribution, right? And so while they were paying a high wage, they were also controlling the prices of the rent and the food that people had access to. And so what ends up happening is you have these coal miners who mine 16 tons of coal in a day, right? And then get paid a wage that doesn't cover for their food and services, and so they end up in debt to the company store. And of course, it's a debt they will never pay, right? They'll never pay that debt, and so they end up. This is where the unionization movement begins in the United States, is in these coal mines, and because of course the coal miners put together pretty quickly that this is a scam, that they've been scammed, and the result of this is that not only does a coal mining union succeed ultimately, but it also ends up being the first aerial bombardment on American soil in the history of the nation, on the history of humanity, in fact, because one of these coal mining companies, while these union workers are striking, they actually drop a bomb from a plane on them while they're striking. And the American labor movement, like the union movement, you can find out pretty quickly. Like this is generally how. Like you can find out pretty quickly if somebody's a liberal or not, based on whether or not they have any idea what's going on in the labor movement, right? Like, I did a video about Destiny and Richard Wolff had a debate. And the whole time I was listening to it, I was like, oh, Destiny's just like illiterate. Like he doesn't know anything about the union movement in the United States. He doesn't know anything about the labor movement and how bloody it was and how like difficult it was to actually get even basic rights, even basic like, hey, maybe we should have wages that allow us to buy food and shelter without enslaving us, right? Like really, really basic things. And knowing more about the labor movement and knowing more about this kind of thing. And you know what? I am going to play that song for you guys. I was debating in my head the whole time whether or not I was actually going to play 16 Tons, but I think after telling that story, I've got to, like, this is a song that Virginia coal miners were singing. And I've written an extra verse to it, but I think it's accurate. Like,
some people say a man is made out of mud. Poor man's made of muscle and blood, and skin and bone, and a mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. If you see me coming, better step aside. A lot of men didn't and a lot of men died. I got one fist of iron, the other's of steel. If the right one don't get you, the left one will. You load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. A poor man's there to suffer and bleed, to pay for a rich man's wealth and greed. Take this here shovel, get down in that earth. The money you make me, that's all that you're worth. You load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul. Whoa, you load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. And like art is like, that's why art is inextractable from the revolutionary movement. That like the most powerful thing that exists in a revolution and in a revolutionary moment is its art. That which is why the capitalist class does everything it can to silence the arts and silence the artists, right? That's why they've destroyed funding across North America. That's why the only way that you can be an artist is if you subserviate yourself or capitulate yourself to a capitalist. Art is political. That's exactly right. Art and art is political by its very nature, right? That art and politics are inextractable from one another. And so, and because capitalists are aware that like the most potent and powerful tool that exists against them is our artists and is our artistic expression, they have to do everything they can to clamp down on it and to make it so that, like, what like 16 tons is like the voice of slaves. Like that's the voice of a wage slave coming from 150 years ago, just being propelled into today's world, and it's unstoppable. Like it's unstoppable. This and like we don't know the people who created and sang the song. We never will know who they are. We know who kind of popularized the song. Yeah, the best part of politics are the editorial cartoons, right? Like, yeah, and even those have been so, like, they're so tepid, like they're so